So there we go. We have our church history in the center. And then we actually want to create a little background for it. So we're going to go down to our rectangle tool, and each of these tools have multiple tools underneath it. You can see the little arrows down at the bottom of each tool. There's a little black arrow. When you click and hold, a little menu, a drop-down menu pops up, and you can see what tool I'm just clicking and holding right now. And when you let go on the tool that you want, that's the tool that's selected there. So we're on the rectangle tool. I'm just going to click and drag from the top left to the bottom right of where I want this rectangle to be. So there we have black text, or black rectangle, but our text disappeared. That's because in our layers palette, the rectangle is above the church history layer. So we're going to click and drag that shape below the church history text. And Photoshop works in layers. It's the way Photoshop works at its most basic level. So the Hebrew Bible is on the bottom, then there's the black rectangle, then there's the church history text. Now if I put the church history text below the Hebrew Bible, and then at the very bottom I have that white background. If I put the church history text below the Hebrew Bible, that would disappear because it's below that. If you imagine it in a physical space, if you had 3 pieces of paper and you wrote church history on one of them, and then you put it on the bottom of that stack of paper, you wouldn't be able to see it. So it works kind of in that way. Now that we have that, I wanted to choose kind of a red, so I'm actually double clicking on this this little box here that's next to the shape. It's the layer thumbnail. So when I double click on that, I want to choose a red here. So that looks like a pretty good red, and I'll press OK. And I actually want this to be a little see-through. So we're going to change what's called the opacity of the layer. When you're on your layers palette, there's a couple options on here: lock, fill, opacity. So with that layer selected, it's highlighted. You see the blue highlight there. We're going to slide the opacity down to about 50%. So what I just did is I hovered over opacity, clicked and dragged to the left, and that slid the opacity. You can actually just type in 50 as well. So zooming out, that looks decent. It's maybe a little bit too opaque, so I'm going to slide it back up to like a 60%, maybe even 65. There, that looks pretty good. If you're not happy with the color at this point, because obviously it's going to change, you would double click on the layer thumbnail again and maybe move it around till you are a little bit happier with that color. Okay, now we're going to add the GracePoint logo. I will have this available for download. It's just a PSD file with the GracePoint logo as a layer on top. So we're going to do the same thing where we're going to click and drag this layer. So I have a keyboard shortcut where it tiles all the windows. I'm actually going to close our finished one. Don't want to save it. Okay. I'm going to click and drag that GracePoint logo over onto our document and let go. And there you go. It pops up. Click here. I have a shortcut to go back to the tabbed view. And there I'm going to shrink it down using the same thing, free transform, Command T. I'll go pretty quickly here. So I'll get it down to a decent shape. Usually I'll put the GracePoint logo on the bottom left, just because that's a good visual spot for it, I think. And I'm going to when I pressed enter there, it gave me this dialog box. I'm going to say place. And then I'll just move it around a little bit. But we want that to be white, and it's just an image. So we're going to use this, with that logo selected, we're going to use what's called layer effects. There's a little FX thing. You click on it, it brings up this drop down menu. We're going to say color overlay because we want to overlay a certain color. We'll click on the color here and change it to white. So there we go, it changes it to white. It's not that visible, so we're actually going to add what's called a drop shadow behind it. It's on the top left here. Check mark that. And there's a bunch of different options here. I'm not going to go over these in this particular tutorial. I would just mess around with them on your own. You want to get it to a point where it's not super harsh. That's usually the default's pretty harsh, and so you don't want that. You want it kind of to be a subtle glow almost in the background. So there we go, that looks pretty good. Press OK. Move around a little bit so it's just above the page there. And I'm not real happy with this font, so I'm going to change this font to something that I found earlier. It's called Copperplate. I'm not sure if it comes standard with anything, with any operating system. If you don't have it, that's not a big deal. What I want you guys mainly to do is just create a document with an image in the background, a title on there somewhere, and the GracePoint logo. So whatever font you're happy with, that's what font I want you to use. And I'm just going to nudge this down making sure my move tool is highlighted up on the top left and using the down arrow key to nudge it down. And that looks decent. I mean, I'm not going to add all the flourishes that I did in the other document that I showed you, but that's to the point where it has a title, you can read it, it has an image background, it has the GracePoint logo, and that's all I'm looking for. Oh, the biggest thing that I actually forgot to do, this is really bad, I forgot to save the whole time while I was working. So if something happened, Photoshop decided to shut down, you know, my computer crashed, I don't know what would happen, it would get overloaded or something, I would have lost all that work, and that would be terrible. So we want to go up to File, Save As, and I'm going to save it as PowerPoint Tutorial Church History. Make sure you're saving it as a Photoshop file, and you want the layers box checked and the embed color profile checked. Click Save and OK for maximizing compatibility. And there you go, you have your file. And I showed you how, once you have this file in my other tutorial, exporting for web, PowerPoint, or I think web and PowerPoint, I'm not sure exactly what I called it. But in that tutorial, I showed you how to export that to a file that Steve can use as the PowerPoint background. Okay, if you have any more questions, you can feel free to email me or leave a comment. And thanks for watching.